How do we get into action? What are the roles for cities, for states, for regional governments? And how can we work with business? And we've got the perfect set of speakers here to help us think through this. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Cristiana Figueres, convener of Mission 2020, former Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, and as we announced today, our new Global Ambassador for the Under 2 Coalition. Also, welcome back to the stage, Governor Brown. I'm glad to have you back here, and we can really pick your brains on the topic in the next hour or so. And a warm welcome to Vice President Šefčovič from the European Commission. Looking forward to hearing about European leadership on climate. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask each of the speakers to make an opening statement, give us some of their thoughts, but this will be an interactive session. So as you're speaking, be thinking of what you would like to ask them. I'm going to turn it over to the floor directly afterwards. But Cristiana, if I could ask you to start.
Thanks, Helen, and good afternoon. I think it's afternoon here, if here is here.
Yes, here.
Good afternoon to all of you, and delighted to be here. And thank you very much, Governor and Helen, for asking me to be an ambassador for the Under 2 Coalition, which is very exciting, yet another very exciting initiative that is very complementary of all of the efforts that are currently underway. Having said the protocol opening, now may I say the not politically correct opening, and that is, thank you, Mr. Trump. Honestly, I think we all will end up, if we're not already, thanking Mr. Trump for two things. One is for putting climate change on the front pages again. I was actually getting a little bit sad because, you know, on the 12th and the 13th and the 14th and the 15th of December of 2015, we were on the front pages of every single newspaper. And then we kind of went back to page 6 or 7 or 10, and that's a little bit sad. But now we're back on page 1. So thank you to Mr. Trump for putting us back on the front page of every newspaper of the world. And also, thank you because given his announcement last week, I think what has happened, certainly just before that, but remarkably more so after that announcement, what he has caused is not an equal and opposite direction, but rather an opposite and far superior reaction, which is, in my book, a tsunami of support that has been made public, not just in support of the Paris Agreement, in support of the science of climate change, but certainly in a deepened commitment to act on climate change, to ensure that we not just reach what we have said in the Paris Agreement, but rather we might even be overachieving and on a faster pace. So for all of that, I truly thank Mr. Trump for having woken us up out of our lull and invited us to stand up and do the work that we know that has to be done in a very short time period. I just wanted to also make a few little comments about the role of cities and states and provinces, all of whom are under the Under 2 MOU, and thank Governor Brown again for your initiative 2 years ago to initiate the Under 2 MOU, which, you know, the first time that I heard Governor Brown explain this to me, I thought it was such a brilliant concept because it gives two different measurements to anyone who wants to join with the same number. So either you commit to under 2 degrees or you commit to under 2 tons per capita. And it's two different measurements that ultimately come out to the same result, but it allows everyone, whether you be a city, a person, a state, a region, to measure yourself in the way that you would like to. So a very quick, simple, and easy way to measure the final destination where we need to go. So the role of those who are under the Under 2 coalition, I think, is a very important role for three different reasons. A, because it provides the action that is being put forward by these actors, provides, first of all, stability, since we do know that electoral cycles come and go up and down, and these actors tend to have more policy stability that is absolutely necessary for, certainly policy stability that is necessary for private sector and investors to know that there is certain predictability here around which they can plan. The second is the speed, because as we know, national governments have a very difficult time in moving quickly because of the complexity of all of the issues that they need to deal with at the same time, so that these stakeholders can actually move much more quickly, and speed is of essence. When it comes to climate change, timing really is everything. So speed is very important, and then of course scale. California, as we all know, has committed to actually being 100% renewable. They're well on their way to being 100% renewable by 2045, if I'm correct, Governor Brown.
That's a bill.
That's a bill.
It's not quite law yet.
But it will be.
Well, I never comment until I get it.
Oh, okay. Well, you don't comment, but maybe I can comment in admiration of the ambition and aspiration. And as we know, we have a growing number of corporations that have actually already committed to 100% renewables and growing. And the new and courageous city of Pittsburgh is the newest one that has just committed to 100% renewables, and we all know why. So again, another thank you to Mr. Trump on that one. So for all three reasons, for stability, for speed, and for scale, it is really very important that all of these actors work with each other, and in the best of all cases aligned with federal government, but in those cases in which that's not possible, that should not stop anyone from doing so and trudging ahead. So thank you very much, Helen, for your leadership, Governor, and Maros also. I am totally delighted to join the Under 2 MOU and the coalition, and will put my shoulder to the wheel.
Great. Thank you very much, Christiana. Governor Brown, we heard a lot from you this morning, a real call to action. We'd love to hear more about that call to action and what we can see some national governments doing.
Okay. Yeah, there is a call to action. That's why you're here. Many of you have come a long way, and we're coming in the service of a very unusual cause, and that is the cause of environmental stability, arresting climate change that moves at a pace that has no historic parallel. Certainly the climate has been warmer, but it got that way at a much more glacial speed. Today, when you look at the difference between now and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the changes are quite rapid in geological terms. So this is an unprecedented period. There's no precedent for what we're experiencing. There never was 7 billion human beings. There never was 1 billion automobiles. There never was thousands of coal plants until very, very recently. So that is having an impact that humankind has no historic experience of. And that's why the matter of climate change in many quarters, in many governments, in many minds is treated as just another issue. Maybe a big issue, but another issue. That's not quite accurate by far. This is a profoundly significant threat to the well-being of everyone, of all countries, and the stability of the world. We know when we look at history, the wars that have taken place, the wars in China, the Civil War in the United States, the massacre of the native peoples in America, the wars in Europe, the 30 Years' War, World War I, World War II. All these things have happened that have made so many people suffer. Well, climate change is going to make everything worse. Whatever has led to war, whatever stress, scarcity, competition, all those propensities are going to be exacerbated. They're going to be intensified. If water is short, there's water shortages, there's droughts, there's more disease infestation, there are fires, there's a lowered productivity in food production. So all of that tells us that we're dealing with the game changer, which is climate change. And so our reaction can't be like most of our political institutions are used to encountering. We have to act in unprecedented ways. And the Under 2 MOU is an attempt to get local government, those which you represent, to be engaged in the challenge, in the endeavor to roll things back. And it's not easy, it's not cheap. And I don't think we've really gotten beyond relatively superficial efforts. But we've gone a long way from where we were 3 years ago, that's for sure. The Paris Accord was a milestone. And now Mr. Trump, of course, he has established the null hypothesis of climate denial. Made it very clear that climate denial has no foundation. It is a complete, profound error. So establishing that null hypothesis gives us a clear path forward in the opposite direction. And that's what I hope we're doing today. So the concrete, how you do that, learn how to measure your greenhouse gases, learn what the immediate steps are, what are the short-term things can be done, what are the medium-term, what are the long-term. But make no mistake, we're talking about turning around the whole modern economy. Modernity, the prosperity, our whole view of ourselves in the world is based on carbon pollution, and carbon energy production. That's what it's all about. And we're here gathered to reverse that rather quickly and move humanity down a path of benign energy and efficiency, and I would say elegance in the way our economic activities are conducted. So I think the most important thing is to see clearly where we are, what are we up against? And then if we can keep that stark threat in front of our minds, then we can find the motivation to do what we have to do. Because what we have to do is more difficult than anything humanity's ever done before. We are deeply embedded in our carbon world. And to decarbonize that is a transformation in the profoundest sense of that word. And transformations never come easy. Politicians like to talk about change. Other people like to talk about transformation. But to really transform and to go from oil consumption or coal or even natural gas to minimize methane, to minimize all the other heat-trapping gases, this is going to take relentless, creative, widespread, universal change. So I recount the context because I think if we get the nature of what we face, we'll figure out how to respond and we'll be able to create the path going forward. If we think it's just like other problems, we're not going to do what we have to do. We've got to really step up our game, so to speak. So that's all I'm saying. And the steps have to be, we got to measure the extent of our carbon pollution. What's going on in our state or province? And then what steps can we make to change? And I think it's incumbent upon this organization to make it easy for people to measure. And we ought to find some internet set of measurement tools that will make that easy. So this is really almost an initial meeting. We'll have another one next year, but we have a big task in turning around things. So Trump took America out. He hasn't taken out yet. It'll take him till after the next election, and maybe the next guy will have a different view. So I'm hoping that will be the case. Anyway, it's really important you're here, and I just encourage you to dig deeper and deeper into the nature of what we face. We can't learn enough about the nature of climate change, the nature of how our atmospheric chemistry is being altered, how our habitat is being destroyed, how species are being extinguished. That has to be almost our daily study so we can find the inner resources to do what we have to do. That's what it is. And I analogize it to when a space vehicle is launched. If you've ever seen the engine and the firing, all to get out of the gravity sink of Earth to put that rocket ship up into space. Well, we have to put ourselves, our states, our regions, our world into a new mentality, a new arrangement of how we live and work together. So it's exciting, it's daunting, and one of the most important contributors to this solution is the Under 2 Coalition. You're it. So don't have any doubts about that. You can make a major contribution, even if you're just beginning. And some here are more sophisticated than others. Some here are doing more. Some have more carbon pollution. Some have less. But I think the diversity here represents a lot of the diversity of the world. And so if we can develop the habit of overcoming this inertia that we all live in, then that will teach the rest of the world how to overcome their inertia. And by and by, the Under 2 Coalition will save the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vice President Šefčovič, we've been hearing in the last week about EU and China stepping forward. We'd love to hear about the EU, European Commission.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Helen. At first, I also would like to appreciate the leadership of Governor Brown, because as I told him, I saw him on the CNN the last week, and I think he was terrific, because he just simply reminded us that how much power is with the states in the United States, in America, how much power there is with regions and with the cities, and therefore I would say these actors would be more and more important in the future in the fight against climate change, and I will come to that in a second. I also would like to thank Christiana for doing an unbelievable job in Paris, because there we really managed to get not only the unique agreement where literally the whole world could support, but also we created the momentum and that positivity which you have very rarely after such a complex and difficult negotiations. And now I think after the statement of President Trump of the last week, I think that message is even more energized and the global community is even more mobilized. So if you allow me just in a few words to tell you how we approach it in Europe. For us, the Paris Agreement is absolute priority. It's the best agreement we could have achieved. It's non-negotiable. We shouldn't discuss it. We should implement it. And this is exactly what we do in the European Union. All that commitments we have undertaken there, we already are transforming them into the law. All the legislative proposals on how we are going to cut 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, how we are going to cut 30% from transport, from agriculture, from our buildings, are already presented in the form of legislative proposals, which I believe will be approved this year or the next year. So this will be done. We also fully understand that we need to help developing world. We just simply cannot forgot about these 1.2, 1.3 billion people who have still the lack of energy. Many of them do not have the basic access to the electricity, and we cannot simply allow them with today's technologies to go through this old-fashioned fossil way, this fossil path, because we can help them with today's technologies, with microgrids, with renewables, really to leapfrog, to jump over this with this fossil phase and give them the necessary energy and also boost for the economic development. And we are going to do that through our development aid, through the new external investment fund, which we are creating, where we want to bring between 40 to 80 billion of euros into this country so they can use these new technologies. But we also know that the fight against climate change will not end up at 2030, where we adopted, for which we adopted our commitments. That we have to strive for the strategic choices, for the long-term planning, and we need to plan already today how we are going to achieve this carbon neutral future, carbon neutral second half of the century. Because we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our transport sector. We need to have the buildings which can produce their own energies, and we have to completely transform our energy networks in Europe. And therefore, we need to stimulate all this in a way that we would create new legal framework, that we would create better conditions for integrating renewables in our system, and we would do exactly what we are doing here these 2 days to support research and innovation, to use these new technologies to bring us new solutions which would be much more friendlier to our climate and to our planet. And if you allow me to conclude by very important reference what the local actors could do. For me, the Paris talks been very significant, not only because of this diplomatic success, but because of all the side events which are there. And the most spectacular one was the debate with the mayors. Because mayors are very often the first addressees. I think it's the same for governors. Where you have too much air pollution, you know where to complain. Where you are not happy with the organization of your transport. Where you have not clean water. Where you have no proper waste management. All this is very often in the competencies of the mayors of the cities. And therefore, they will be the first to be pushed to resolve the situation. They'll be first to act to resolve this problem. And what was so impressive for me was that they do not want to look for the solutions just for themselves. They are ready to share. They want to have a platform where they can learn from each other. And where can they do, for example, in Europe, public procurement? Because if you are going to buy 10 buses or 200 electric buses for several cities, of course, you get a better price. And therefore, that work of the Global Covenant of Mayors, where we have currently 7,500 cities represented, will be more and more important in the future. I'm very happy that we are working on this together with Christiana, who is serving as a vice president, and I have to say very, very executive one. And together with Mike Bloomberg, who is also at the same time the UN Special Envoy for the cities and for the regions. So we decided to really team up Europeans, Americans, the global community to create this new platform which could be so decisive in the future, because I think the local actors, region cities, they need to have this global voice, and I think that they have a lot to say. So looking back at the United States, I totally agree with the governor that for us Europeans it would be a pity not to have American federal government representatives around the table when we will be pushing forward with the Paris agenda. But at the same time, I'm very hopeful that such a progressive states like California, like New York, like many others, these more than 130 cities we have in our Covenant of Mayors, all that progressive corporate leaders will simply push in the right direction, because we know that those who are fighting climate change are on the right side of the history. Thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you very much. So we're going to open it up now to the floor for your questions. So if you'd like to raise your hands. There's some roving mics coming around, I think. Seeing roving people. If we can go back there for a question. And thank you. We need some translation help. Yes. Yes. Thank you. There's a question in the middle there. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm from Taixing Media, and I have a question for Christiana. It is said that even the U.S. is withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, is still in the UNFCCC, and still can influence other countries' decisions at the climate change conferences and negotiations. So, in fact, during all these years of negotiations, the U.S. always disliked the common but differentiated responsibilities. So some negotiators of China are worrying that the U.S. will bring more negative impact on future negotiations. So do you have the same kind of concerns, and what can we do to prevent the situation from getting worse? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to answer that now? Let's take a couple more questions, and then we can come back to that. Thank you, Harry.
Yes, I'm Harry Vaar from Philip Lighting, so pleasure to work with all of you actually. I've got one question. We know that energy efficiency is a crucial part of the equation in curbing carbon emissions, but still the annual improvement rate is only 1.5%, and we're also working a lot in Europe to increase ambition level, whereas we should be talking about how to do it. But what can we do to increase the energy efficiency improvement rate to 3% per year? And
Energy efficiency.
the improvement rate of energy efficiency to 3% per year. Now, particularly of infrastructure, so buildings, because 30 times 3%, you don't have to be a Greek mathematician to know if you want to be carbon neutral mid-century, then this is what it takes. And this is whatever government is in place. This creates the jobs, the reductions in energy bill, but also the associated benefits that people will more quickly embrace, because then they start understanding that this is indeed the better future that we want to create. And of course, how can we help?
Thank you. Let's take one more question. Yep, there's one back there.
Hello, I'm from China Daily, and I'm just wondering if the panel experts, what do you think about President Xi's speech this morning about promoting and implementing more measures and policy to support clean energy, as well as upholding this route of going green and going open? And I'm just curious of your reactions to his speech, and also what China can do in the broad scheme of things when the U.S. has already pulled out from the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So let's go to the panel. Christiana, would you like to take that question first about what's the worry around the US withdrawing? What implication might that have for future negotiations? And then the second political question, open to all of you, about China and President Xi and what China can do.
Did President Xi give a speech this morning?
We were all on stage here, so we might...
Could he repeat that? Could he explain the speech?
Can you say a little bit more about that speech? It'd be great. Bearing, we've been... I suppose I can answer on that, as he was there.
It was the executive deputy prime minister who was delivering the speech, and in that speech there was references to the president's remarks and the president's letter to the Mission Innovation 2 on the Clean Energy Ministerial, and it was, I would say, a very well thought speech, which was really covering horizontally all that energy transformation in China, that how all sectors would have to contribute, how the new technology should play a very important role. And what I have taken away from that speech was that strong focus on, I would say, the very basic important element for which we all have to strive for. And it would go very well in the direction that Governor Brown introduced this panel. That also for China, it's very, very important that the people would have a clean air, that there will be a blue water, as it was said, and the green fields, which will not be polluted. I mean, it's said in very, I would say, human, basic form, but this is what we are striving for. For us in the European Union, I have to say it's very important to see that we have such an important and reliable partner in China. in fighting climate change, that we are cooperating together also on such important projects like the emission trading scheme, which, as it was announced, would be introduced China-wide after this initial pilot stage. We've been very honest with our Chinese partners. We tell them all the secrets, what worked, what didn't work, where we also need to adjust our ETS system. And of course, once China introduces its own ETS, immediately it would be the biggest carbon trading system in the world. And therefore, my idea, which I am selling at these occasions, would be once that China is trading with emission. I know that how successful system California has, that Ontario, Manitoba, Quebec, and quite a few so-called REGI states in the United States have the same system. South Korea, New Zealand, and several other countries. So I think that it would be the time to think in the future, how can we link up this system? How can we, reflect a little bit that maybe in the future we could have something like the global carbon price? Because I think that would be the fair motivation for all those to really push down the emission, to bring in the innovation, and simply to demonstrate that the carbon trading systems are the market-based mechanism which could really deliver the good result. So this was, I would say, my takeaway from the morning speech. And if you allow me then to continue, just a few words on the energy efficiency. I think what is very important there is to change the mindset of the leaders and business leaders in our countries. Because very often investment into climate policies, investment into the energy efficiencies are seen as expenditures. And I think we should reverse that logic, and it should be seen as investment. Because if you simply look how much you can save if you invest in energy efficiency of the big administrative building or even a small house, usually you know very well that by cutting your energy consumption by half, how much money you are going to save. And therefore, I think we have to bring this investors' logic and the business case behind the argumentation of the energy efficiency, because this would bring much more investment and private sector interest in promoting energy efficiency policies. As you know, we in Europe, we propose to have 30% of energy efficiency as a binding target for 2030. The debates on this among our member states are not the easiest one, because not everywhere this logic was already reversed, and therefore I think also the forum like we are attending today would have to help us to spread the message and to create this public demand and public pressure for these measures. Thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you very much. Christiana, would you like to pick up that point?
Yeah, let me answer from my perspective. So it is actually completely unpredictable to know what the United States is going to do from now until the 5th of November of 2019, which is the first date in which the United States might be able, with legal basis, to notify the United Nations that they would like to leave the Paris Agreement, and then it will take a year after that, which takes us to the 6th of November of 2020, and the the U.S. election for new president is on the 4th of November of 2020. So, there is a humor here in the calendar. But in any event, it is completely impossible to know what the United States is going to do, because legally they do have to remain a party to the Paris Agreement until the 6th of November of 2020 at least. And in the meantime, they have politically made a statement. So whether that means that they will actually go to the negotiations and sit at the table, or whether they won't, that is for them to decide. And it really is very difficult to know ahead of time what they're going to do. Having said that, that does not in any way change the fact that common and differentiated responsibilities have always been and will always be the main fulcrum, the golden principle of the Convention and of the Paris Agreement. That is not going to change. The fact that the United States, tends to or has decided to step away doesn't change the truth that there is historical responsibility. That is not ideology, that is not politics, that is not belief. That is simply physics, and that will remain so. And the Paris Agreement is very clear in establishing, once again, the historical responsibility, by definition, the responsibility toward the past, but also of bringing into the picture the common responsibility toward the future. So that balance between the past and the future is very much a part of the Paris Agreement, and that is not going to be changed. With respect to China, I think it's very important to understand that China does not have, with or without the announcement of last Thursday, does not have the responsibility that the United States has. China does not have the historical responsibility. No one can say, because the United States has chosen to step apart, now China has to lead. I'm sorry, I am not in agreement with that statement. And let us be very clear. China has been in the lead not since last Thursday. China has been leading since the 12th five-year plan, in which they put forward very, very clearly their aspirations for renewable energy, for energy efficiency, for building standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So China's leadership and China's participation is not a factor of the United States' absence of leadership. China's leadership is a factor and a result of China's understanding that it is in their own interest to do so. And that is not affected by the fact that the United States is or is not there. China is there. China is there because they understand that they would rather have the kind of sky that we have today rather than a polluted sky. China is there because they understand that in the future there is a competitive edge that must be had by this economy, and that low carbon products and services are the way that China would like to be competitive in the long run. Plus many other reasons for China to do this. So the reasons for China's leadership are not to be confused with the United States' exit, and certainly not the responsibility of China. This is something that China has been championing because of the opportunity that it represents for China, not because of past responsibility.
Thank you very much. Governor Brown, would you like to react as well?
Yeah, that question on buildings, I want to ask, if I can, our energy chair, how fast is California improving the efficiency of its buildings, say, on a year-by-year basis?
What we're trying to do is... Get your microphone. Do you want to use your
What we're trying to do, based upon your goal, is double our energy efficiency activities from where we were already.
Right, but comparing what he said, he wants to go, the gentleman who spoke, he said, instead of going from 1.5% increase in efficiency, go to 3%.
Well, that's
Is that
pretty
right?
much that's pretty much where we're trying to go.
Well, what are we actually doing, though?
Right now, well, the doubling would effectively take us.
I know,
past
but what
that
do
level.
do you know what happened
right now?
last
It's
year?
about 1% or so.
1%.
So doubling, we're going to get to, we need substantial activity on existing buildings, and we already lead the world on energy efficiency, and under your leadership, we will double that.
Right. Okay, but the point I want to make, I'm making you the prop here.
That's fine.
Even California has a hard time
Yeah.
getting to 3%. In fact, he just said we're not there. He said 1%. So, and we're all in. We have the, so I just want to get back to this idea of how difficult the task ahead of us is. And let me focus on this issue with a little more concreteness. I was elected governor in 1975 and hired the first person on the State Energy Commission that went into effect on the day I became governor in 1975. And that Energy Commission in California was mandated to develop efficiency standards. To get those standards into effect took 9 years. 9 years from somebody who wanted to do it. So now, since that time, the standards have been improved. But I just don't want anyone to leave here thinking this stuff is easy. It is not easy. It's hard in California. We have a lot of obstacles, and we have the sophisticated institutions. We got a $2.5 trillion economy, and yet we have interest groups, oil companies and others, that builders who don't want it. Now, for example, the reason I want to say this, if you're in any state or region are developing building standards, let me tell you my experience. By the time we got them finished after 8 years, I met with the builders and they said, don't put them in yet. They're too difficult. So I said, okay, I'll give you another year. Why did I say give them another year? Because I'm a politician. And I wanted to make them happy. But then what if they said, give us 5 more years? I don't think I would have said 5 more years. I was already going out of office, so it didn't matter. But the point is, this is really hard stuff. It's hard to know where you are by way of emissions, where you are by way of efficiency, and then what do you do next? And then even if you do know, you're going to have a lot of people opposing you because it all costs money. So but that doesn't mean we can't do it. We are making progress, and we'll step it up. And maybe what we learn, we can help others. So much for efficiency. We have to speed it up, Bob. Too slow in California. All right, and by the way, the rest are probably much slower than that, because I think we're very sophisticated. How many people are in your Energy Commission? 600 highly paid bureaucrats who are trying to accomplish something, and it's still hard. So that ought to keep you up at night. So don't relax. That's number one. But we're committed. We're going to get it done. But we have to move mountains to get it done. All right. Second thing, would U.S. be a negative influence? It'll probably try, but I don't think it's going to have an effect, because the states of America are going to be the positive influence. And America has the Congress, has the minority party, so as diversity of opinion, diversity of press, diversity of NGOs. So I think that while Trump is maybe not so positive, I think America in general will continue to be a positive force. In fact, I would say I just met Trump's energy man 3 hours ago on the escalator, the Secretary of Energy. He is coming from an administration that says they don't like clean energy, but he's here talking about clean energy. So I think there's hope here, and I think we're going to be turning this around. So that's a good sign. So I don't put too much stock on America. In fact, whatever the negative influence of America, the energy let loose by Trump's attempt to withdraw is so great in terms of the enthusiasm, the activism, the mobilization, that Trump is a net positive for greenhouse gas reduction. If you don't understand that, you just think about it a little longer. Because it's true. I might say that's kind of Zen reasoning. As a student of Zen meditation, and as the Zen master says, if you would move in the east, make a sound in the west. Well, Trump is making a sound in the west, but we're all moving in the east. So that's that point. All right. Final point here about the President Xi. I met with President Xi yesterday. He is very strongly committed to the Paris Accord, to clean energy, to the idea that green is gold, which means green is wealth. So I think we have a lot of positive conditions for our task. The only problem is the task is like climbing Mount Everest. That's how steep it is. So it's a tale of good, it's a tale of a lot of problems. But I'm energized. Are you energized? Are you ready for this? Good. Okay.
Thank you. And just actually going back and building on that point that was raised by a business, Christiana, I wanted to ask you, obviously you're doing a lot of work with mayors as well. What can governors, what can mayors and other leaders do to actually enable a policy environment for business in which they can drive and invest in clean air and technologies?
Well, I want to bridge between that question and the energy efficiency, because I just came from Hong Kong, where the world's Sustainable Built Environment Conference was being held. And I was very taken, because in the context of that conference, which was dominated by technology people, by architects, by urban designers, by everyone who looks at this from a technical and technological point of view, they actually saw the 3% as being entirely possible for new build. Much more difficult for retrofit. But for new build, they saw the 3% being entirely possible, as long as you take the design of new build, and we know that 60% of all the urban structures that we're going to need are still to be built. So there's a huge opportunity here. As long as you take all of those structures and integrate them. So as long as it's not just individual energy efficiency measures, but the whole package, from design to positioning to all of the technologies for heating, cooling, and lighting. And they thought that that is actually pretty well achievable. That was one conversation. Then you move to the other room and you go into the technology developers, the real estate developers, who actually say, well, yes, but we need the policy from the government. And we need the incentives, and we need the stability there in order for us to be able to move forward. And then I moved to the third room where the governments were there. And they say, well, you know, that's pretty difficult, because we don't really understand very well how this would be financed from a public sector point of view. Will the developers still be with us? Are we going to put them out of business or make them non-competitive if we regulate? What is the balance between carrots and sticks? And so there's three completely different conversations between those on the technical level, those that are doing it from a commercial point of view, and governments. And it's very clear that what is necessary is to align these three things, and not to see this as a contrary conversation, but rather to be very bold and say, here's where we want to go. We're committed to getting to the 3%. Now walk it back. How are we going to do it? In particular, in new build, much more difficult, as I say, in retrofit. But in new build, and in particular in developing countries that have the lion's share of new build, it is going to be absolutely primordial that there is an alignment there to be bold, to have those conversations across the sectors, and then to learn from each other. So how do you cooperate to understand? And that World Sustainable Built Environment Conference was really quite spectacular in bringing the minds of the world around to do that, but that is just not enough. So you need the alignment of all three together around a common goal, and then to figure out how we're going to do it. And yes, there are, as Governor Brown says, there are many difficulties, but that cannot stop us as long as the goal is a compelling goal, and the timing. Right? The timing is really important. If we do not get to that 3%, if we start to build the amount of cities that we're building with the kind of energy efficiency or energy use that we have right now, we're in big problem, because those buildings will be there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years with the carbon footprint that they have now. So we will lock in that energy use and that energy demand on the part of those buildings, when actually what we have to do is by 2020 get to bending the curve of emissions. 2020 needs to be burned into our brain, as that is the year after which we need to start bending the curve. So we can't afford, through buildings or through any other investment that we make into energy or into transport, we cannot afford to lock in the high intensity carbon technologies.
And if you allow me just to add a couple of more ideas, because I think that basically what the government could do to promote these positive developments are the three things. The first one, we really need modernizing a legislative framework, which would incentivize better integration of renewables, which would promote new standards in the building, which would accelerate the build-up of modern infrastructure, for example, for electric or hydrogen vehicles. Second very important element is to provide modern financing, especially if you go, I would say, to the infrastructural financing, or if you're going to the riskier research and innovation projects, that you need to develop the financial instruments which would provide this risk-sharing facility for all those who are ready to invest, who are just hesitating. Maybe we would go there, we would try, but still we hesitate. And in that case, I think we should step in and say, look, we are going into this project with you. We are ready to share the risk, and we are ready to take on our balance sheet your first eventual losses, because this is very often the trick which helps the investors to move in the right direction. And the last thing, and here again, governments but local authorities, public procurement. If you decide, as it is in Netherlands, that as of 2025 you would have in the whole Netherlands only electric buses, this is mobilizing, I would say, the sector, the transport sector, the local authorities, and the same goes for the government, same goes for the mayors if they decide that they would like to use for communal services only electric vehicles or some new modern technologies. Again, it creates the market, it promotes the new technologies, and it helps to introduce these positive elements into the public system.
Fantastic. I think we're actually at the end of our time here. We can get this one last question in.
Thanks to our panelists for their inspiring efforts. I just want to double click on the second point that the commissioner just made. I'm Andrew Chung. I'm a California delegate and founder of 1955 Capital. We were lucky to launch the largest new venture capital firm of 2016, specifically to bring advanced technology from the West to China, India, and other developing markets. But despite the size of the funds that we were able to raise, it's a tiny fraction of the tens of billions of dollars that are going to be necessary in order to deliver the dream of under 2. My question is, what are some of your views on how we can better encourage and marshal the type of private and public funding that's going to be necessary in order to deliver this triple benefit?
Thank you. So that will have to be our last question. I'd love to hear from all of you on that, and also if you can throw in there the one action you think everyone should prioritize the result of today.
Look, how do you get the money? You go to where the money is. Where is the money? It's in government to a great extent. And if government doesn't have it, they can grab it. Right? The government is the power, the Leviathan. So we have to light a fire under government. You've got to get the politicians excited about climate change, and then they will start spending the money. That can happen. And we need mechanisms like cap and trade or other programs. But I think the number one thing which I am harping on is we need the change in consciousness. We need the change in understanding, and we got to get the politicians to experience part of that change. Yes, we need trillions, but we don't need it overnight. So we got to keep making that step. And there's a lot to be done, and under 2 is going to be the focal point for a lot of this. And we've got to push our own local governments, and then they have to push the big national governments. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. I think we have a
Can I just add on to that one point is that economics, Governor, will not let subnational governments and the private sector to invest in technologies or to accept power which is higher priced. So during discussions, of course, it is not sheer economics alone, and therefore this clean development mechanisms that the EU is talking about and the carbon markets that they were talking about at some point of time will have to become operational, and maybe not completely, but at least some part, like France was saying, that some part of what is the carbon offset could be allocated to the developing world so that they invest in these carbon markets, and the technologies in the developing world can also take advantage of these carbon markets, and then there will be a methodology by which those technologies will become institutionalized. I also would like to say that you've heard that our Prime Minister from India has not only said that they will look, they are with the Paris Protocol, but they will go beyond the Paris Protocol. But there's a lot more to be done at the subnational level, and I'm sure that this carbon markets is one way in the future in which there will be a distribution of technologies and monies between the developed OECD countries and the developing countries.
All right, I'll just tell you one thing for India. If the method of cooking for hundreds of millions of people in India were changed to a non-polluting, renewable source of energy, that would do amazing things to reduce black carbon, which is a super carbon pollutant. So there's a lot of things at the local level. Of course, as you point out, it takes a lot of money. So either from Modi or from Brown or somebody, you got to get that money.
Thank you. Vice Premier.
I think that what is, I think, very important and the most important thing besides all those we have mentioned, I would say this afternoon, would be to find a common language with those group of investors whom I'm receiving quite often, especially when such a, let's say, climate investors group enters your office and they will tell you that, look around, we are controlling assets of, last meeting was 13 trillion euros. Being from the country like Slovakia, very often I didn't believe that so much money exists in the world, but apparently they are. And they are telling me we are ready to invest to promote energy transition, the clean technologies, but we need regulatory stability. We need the very clear sense of direction, and we need to see this, what I call this grand alignment, that we have the global community agreement from Paris. We in Europe are modernizing the European legislative framework. We have mobilized mayors. But what they need to see is also that earnest desire from the level of the governments, of the states. They very much want to do it, and they are also adjusting their strategies toward that goals, and not only for 2030, but for the second half of this century. So if I should sum it up, I would say that our priority should be to think how we can get also the private sector to move, and how to get these billions of from investment funds to fight climate change. What kind of arrangement we can have with this big investors group to make them comfortable and confident that the investment in such a progressive goals, it's not done only for environmental goals, but has very, very strong business sense as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And Cristiano, I'd like to give you the last word in this session.
So I believe in the power of envy, which is a more provocative way of saying the power of modeling, of good examples, because I think, the theory that we have heard, we know what the theory is. We know what the governments have to do. We know where the finance is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that only remains in the books and in the thinking of people unless they can actually see it exemplified in successful examples. In successful examples of where this investment has actually already occurred, where it is good business, where it is contributing to better health, to better energy independence, to better food security. And unless we have those very concrete examples, then this remains in the theory. So my invitation is, let's create more and more examples. And luckily, we already have quite a few examples to point with. But those are the ones that are going to help us to learn from very quickly and to motivate further action.
Thank you very much. And please join me in thanking all our speakers for this session.